Hi, this is Zach from Mercury Works. I'm going to show you the 65mm, 70mm panoramic back by Mercury Works. This is designed for large format cameras or the Mercury Stereo 12 camera. Basically any camera that takes a Graflock 4.5 back, which is most modern large format 4x5 cameras. Now this back we create from a vintage Graflex RH50 back. That was a back designed to take 6x7 medium format photos on large format cameras or on Graflex XL medium format cameras. Now it's designed originally for 70mm film. But what we do is we completely remachine it and re-engineer it, rebuild it from the ground up so that instead of a medium format 6x7 frame, it exposes a full 6x12 panoramic frame. That requires creating an entirely new, machining a new dark side channel, creating a new dark slide, building up the internals, adding film guides, re-engineering the frame counter, etc. But here's how the back works. This is what you start out with, and as you notice it says 6x12 and a reminder to advance 1.5 times for each frame, which we'll get into in a minute. First, how do you load this thing? It accepts by default, you just open it up, and if you lift the insert out, you have to lift the insert out in order to load it. Otherwise it won't open. But basically this is the film insert, this is the shell. The film insert is loaded with traditionally a 70mm cassette. So this is in a Mercury cassette canister. If we open that up and take a look, we have preloaded a roll of 70mm film. Now I'm not going to show you how to load it today. I do that in another video, how to load 65mm or 70mm cassettes. But basically here's what you do to load this back. You open this up. There's a little catch, a little silver catch inside at the bottom left of this back. And what you do is you push it to the left. And when you do, you can then swing this door open. Okay. When you swing this door open, you can now load and unload cassettes. And what we've added, because it can be very confusing in the original Graflock's original back, what we've added is a little diagram that shows the proper orientation of each cassette and the proper direction that the film loads. But I'll also show you that. So what you do is you take your cassette, you want the square side, you're always evaluating these cassettes based on the square corner that juts out a little bit, right? When it juts out, that's the direction that the film always loads or unloads on the spool that's inside the can. You're looking for that little jut is the direction the film comes in or goes out. That's also how you know the orientation of the cassette. So in this case, you want that little jutting part to be sticking at the bottom and feeding out this way, feeding up and around the roller. Okay, so to do that, you just hold the cassette in place, you pull your film out. Now, I highly recommend that you add leader to your film. That way you're not wasting this basically about 11 inches of film at the beginning of each roll. To add leader, you need a Mercury cassette splicer, and I cover the use of that in the how to load a bulk roll video. Now, we have have one for 70 millimeter and one for 65 millimeter. Now, you just roll this around, back out the back side, and following the arrows, you know it's got to come around like this. Then it needs to go into the take-up cassette like this. It's going to curl up like that. So what you do is you get a second cassette. This is your take-up cassette. They're identical, and what you do is you're going to start by attaching the film. Now remember, the film comes over and then it curls back around. You do not want to load it into a take-up spool like this. It has to come around, curl around like that. Okay, to do that, with the original 70 millimeter spool, you bring it around in the proper orientation. Generally would spin this around one time and then pop this metal spool on there. I actually recommend that you use blue painter's tape instead of the spool, but I'll show you that when we load 65 millimeter film. I would do that for even 70 millimeter film. Okay, now we know that we have this in the proper orientation. The film is coming essentially under the spool and rolling into the top of the spool. Now we have to get the cassette in the proper orientation. And it's just like on this side, you want the jutting part to be pointed up over the roller. Now that might be on either side of the cassette, depending on which cap you've taken off. Since both sides can come off, you kind of randomly generally pop one off and then have to figure out at this stage how to do this. Now, my tip for how to line up so that your spool is in the right orientation and your cassette is in the right orientation is to first just worry about the spool. Hold your spool in the proper orientation, then figure out how to get the cassette over the spool such that this jutting part is coming out the correct side, pointing up. So in my case, this is the proper orientation. So without adjusting these in relation to each other, you can come over here and feed this spool into the cassette, holding it in what you know will be the proper orientation. Then you pinch it. You pinch this closed and feed this corner over the cassette and just snap it in place. Now that I have that, I might need to pull a little more film. I'm going to bring it over and snap it in place. When I've got the film properly fed, I just push up this hinged bottom, and snap it in place. Now it's locked in place, and my film generally looks correct. One thing I'm going to need to do though is tighten it up, and to do that I'm going to hold the film on the left so that it doesn't pull out anymore from the cassette, and I'm going to just wind the film until I can feel it tight. Now it's nice and taut. It's ready to go. When I have it tight like that, you're also going to want to then finish one stroke. So right here I'm toward the end of a stroke. It doesn't pull film until you get to wherever you left off on the lever. I'm going to let up a little bit and allow a little bit more film to come out until I've completed that stroke. You need to be at a complete stroke at the end of loading this insert. Once I've loaded the insert, I just put it back, and I should have said you can do this in the daylight. This is this 70 millimeter, 65 millimeters, a daylight load system. That's what those cassettes are for. You shouldn't really do this in really bright light because you could get just a little extra light leaking in. But basically, this film is going to be exposed no matter what to the light, and you should do this in kind of subdued light. But you can do this fully in the light. You don't have to do this in the dark. Okay, once I'm done, I'm going to put this right back onto, sometimes you gotta kind of line it up, get it back into the shell, and then you can just close the shell. When you close the shell, you just pop it closed until it snaps in place. To open it again, you have to press this side and this side together, and if you don't do that, it should be nice and tight. Now that you've got the film loaded in the back, you need to do two things. First of all, you need to reset the frame counter. You don't do this before you load, you have to do it afterwards. And what you do is you just turn this little knob. Sometimes it's silver, sometimes it's black, and you turn it counterclockwise. It won't turn clockwise, but it'll turn counterclockwise. And when you turn it, see if you can see this, you'll see the actual frame counter moving. You'll go through your numbers. And what you want to do is go all the way through and come back to this little red arrow. Advance until the red arrow is lined up with the indicator. Okay, so there I am. I'm on the red arrow after I've finished loading, and at this point I'm now going to advance the film until I get to frame number 1. Now you don't have to do this right away. Of course, you could leave it like this. In fact, it's probably better to leave it like this until you're out at your shooting session. And when you're ready to shoot, you can now advance to frame 1. But there is something to check. And that is, if you notice here, over on this side, there's a little window, a little round window, and you'll see inside a little line. And that line will rotate in a circle whenever you advance your film. And what that is that's a check to make sure that the film is properly advancing through the back. This is extremely useful if you've ever used a film back that does not have any transport indicator and found that something's gone wrong in your roll and you weren't loading or didn't or whatever. This is always your check that the film is actually transporting properly through the camera. Now, when I do a stroke, first of all, I can feel tension on the film, but I can also see, I don't know if you can see, but I can see this little line spinning. That's how I know it's working properly. And when you advance this, you shouldn't advance it, incredibly fast or hard. Be gentle on the film. It has to pull a long way through a long film gate. But you'll notice that this advanced to the next circle. Looks a little red dot. I'm going to do that again. And when I do that one more time, I'm going to be on frame number 1. Okay, I'm on frame 1. It's ready to expose. So to shoot, you just put it on a camera, and you're going to pull the dark slide. I'm going to do this now. Of course, you would never do this off the camera, but you can see the film is there. It's going to expose a large panoramic frame on a large format camera, or it's going to expose your left and right frames on the Mercury Stereo camera. When you pull your dark slide, you'll pull to the point where a line appears. You could stop there, or you could remove it all the way. One thing to be aware of is these are older backs, and the light blocking material inside is not actually user accessible. It's not even accessible to us. Therefore, you don't want a lot of bright light coming in to this slot. Even if the dark side is still in there, you don't want a lot of bright light because it can still get in and cause a light leak. So one thing you can do is, if you're going to be shooting a while and you're not changing lenses or anything like that, what you can do is tape this slot up. Remove the dark side in subdued light and use a small piece of black cloth gaffer's tape, which is light tight, right over this slot. Seal it up and shoot for as long as you need to. That's the most light tight way with this or any other back with a removable dark side. Okay. But anyway, when you're done shooting, you reinsert the dark side. Generally, we put little, you insert the dark side all the way in or up to the black lines. If we've added black lines to the dark side, that shows you when the dark black lines are at the edge, that means that the dark side is inserted all the way. And that's just a check in case something gets in the way and you're not sure if you're all the way closed or not. It should be all the way up to the black lines, or if there are no black lines, fully inserted all the way into the back. Once you've exposed a frame, you want to immediately wind your film. Advance to the next frame. This is an important skill to learn or habit to get into, because if you don't do it now, you will never remember if you did it or not. So you always, once you've exposed a frame, just teach yourself to ignore everything else and until you've advanced your film, which only takes less than a second or about a second. So it isn't difficult to do, but it's amazing how easy it is to forget to do that until you train yourself. So what you need to do is you have to, as it says, as it reminds you on the back, you have to advance 1.5 times. And what that means is 1.5 strokes of the lever advances you one frame. This is the only tricky part. That half in the 1.5 might be in the first stroke, or it might be in the second stroke. It's going to alternate in shots between the two. Now, how do you know if it's the beginning or the end? It's a stroke only counts, your 1.5 strokes. A stroke only counts when you feel tension when it's pulling the film. It's very clear when there's tension versus when there's no tension. Now, right now, there's tension already at the beginning of this stroke. So what I'm going to do is, this will be my first one. Again, I advance it. I let it back. You should not let go of this and let it spring, the lever, and let it spring back. That can actually cause a little buckle in the film, and that buckle can cause your film to misfeed. So this is actually just a caveat of this back. It's very important to gently let your lever back. This is a huge lever and a huge mechanism, and it can really disturb your film if you let it go. So you gently let it back. That's one stroke. Now, I am now going to do a half stroke. And a half stroke, there's a little white, see this little white triangle? What I'm trying to do is I'm going to line the right side of my lever up with that triangle, and that's half. That's how I know that I'm at half. So pulling forward, I'm feeling the tension on the film. Also, this circle is turning. I know my film is pulling. I go right up to the point where my lever aligns with that, and I let it back. I'm on my next frame. You might notice that the frame counter can always be off by up to half a frame, and that's by the nature of the mechanism. It's one reason that we only label every other frame. So it has advanced. You can see it's advanced past the 1. It is actually advanced, I don't know, about a third of the way. That's fine. In other words, every other frame will advance by 1 or 1.5 That doesn't really matter. This always is accurate up to about a half a frame. So I'm on number 2, even though it looks just shy of 2, where 2 would be. Now, if I were to advance again, I actually feel right now no tension on this. When I get to the point where I stopped before, now I can feel tension. This is hard to explain in just a video, but easy to feel when you do it. I'm going to shoot my next frame, expose my next frame, and when I advance a second time, this isn't advancing at all. It's not advancing the film. This isn't turning. I feel no tension. That's because it's going to leave off wherever I last advanced to. Now when I get to this point, now I feel tension, and I'm going to go ahead and advance. So when I advance from that halfway point to the end, I've now advanced half a frame. Right? So the 1.5 frames I have to advance now I did the half, and now I completed that stroke, so it has tension right from the beginning. I go again, 1 full frame. Now I've done my 1.5, and you'll notice that the frame counter has advanced to number 3, which is accurate. Now I'm ready to expose my 3rd frame. This is very easy in practice, hard to explain, but there are 2 possible advances, and they're going to alternate in frames. So advance number 1, it has tension from the beginning. I can feel it. I advance my full frame, and then I advance a half frame. Done. My next shot, oh wait, there's no tension here. What I'm going to do is, starting here, I'm going to advance my half frame, and now my full frame. So it's always 1.5 frames. It just alternates, either the full and then a half, or the half and then a full. Your only counts as advancing when you feel strong tension on it during the advance. So that's how you advance the film. 1.5 strokes, either half and then full, or full and then half. In practice, you don't have to remember anything. You can just feel it when you do it. And that's it. When you get to the end of your roll, of course, you'll just roll the film onto the take-up cassette and pop it out and be done. However, there's something else you can do. You can cut mid-roll. That's the beauty of this back and 70mm, the original 70mm format in general, is you can always cut mid-roll. At any point, you can cut it and develop it. And here, I'll show you how to do that. What you do is, you've taken your last frame. Once you've done your last frame, you go ahead and advance a full extra frame, right? So let's say number 4 was my last frame. I then went ahead and I advanced an extra frame, which is 1.5 strokes. Once I've done that extra advance, my frame is safely taken up into the cassette. And what I'm going to do is actually open the back. If you want to be really safe and save film, you can do this in the dark, but you don't have to. You can do this in subdued light. You just open it up, take out your insert, flip it upside down like this so you can access the film, and then you just cut it. If you're cutting, you can cut it right in the middle, or to save a little bit of film for loading, you can do it here. Now, you be careful with scissors. You don't want to scratch the pressure plate here, so don't let the scissors scratch against the plate. Make sure they're up against the film, and all you do is cut the film like that. Now, when you flip this back over, you have 2 sides, 2 cassettes ready to go. All you need to do is pop this open, hinge it open, pop this out. Now, this is the exposed side. This is always the exposed side. This is the unexposed side. Very important. Make sure that you pop out the exposed side, the right side, and you can actually just, you could use a pinky finger or a pencil to roll this up. this little extra, but you can also, much easier, just push it in. Doesn't hurt anything to push it in. You want to leave a little bit on the outside, or at least I do, although since this isn't loading, you could push it all the way in. Either way, you're going to take this, put it back in, if you have one, put it back in your cassette canister. You just pull the film, pop it in place. Now you're fully protected from light impacts, etc. You should probably mark this as exposed. Make sure that you keep track of which are exposed and which are feed and which are take-up spools. This can now go, you can send it in for developing, or you can set it aside to develop yourself. But the crucial thing here is that now that I've separated that for developing, I can keep shooting from my original cassette. To do that, all I need to do is bring in a new spool and load it just like I always do. Load this spool, bring in a second cassette, load it up, load it in the camera, just as I showed you, and I can go back to continuing to shoot from this roll. So I might do that if I'm just ready to develop and I haven't finished my roll yet. No problem. Again, this is a professional system meant for this. You never have to finish your roll. You can just keep on shooting, take what you have shot, and set it aside for developing. Another reason you might do this is if you want to change your ISO. So I might say, oh, okay, I was shooting this at box speed, but now I've gone indoors, or it's nighttime or whatever, and I need to, push it 2 stops. I separate out one part of the roll that I've shot, and now I'm going to change the ISO to, 2 stops more. By the way, there's a little memo spot here, and that's what you use. You use a pencil, standard pencil, to write the type of film and whether it's, obviously whether it's push or pull, what the ISO is, and whatever information you need to write it there. That tells you that film is loaded in the camera. Now I'm going to show you something really cool. This Mercury back can shoot not only 70mm film, but also 65mm film. This is Kodak's fresh motion picture film used for the IMAX cinema format. Mercury Works sells this film in 100-foot bulk spools. In the previous video, I showed you how to load that film into cassettes, into 70mm cassettes. So you use the same cassettes, but you're loading 65mm film instead of 70mm film. It loads and functions almost the exact same way. When you load it in the back, and again, you can also add leader to this if you have the Mercury Works 65mm cassette splicer. The only difference here is that you need to load onto a Mercury 65mm spool instead of a 70mm spool. The 65mm spool works in the back the exact same way, but one of these spools works in the 70mm cassettes exactly the same way. They're designed to be perfectly compatible with those cassettes, but you're loading 65mm film. You need to have the proper spool, and both when you're loading the film and when you're on the take-up spool. So take-up spool, It still works exactly the same way, except that I don't ever recommend using the little metal clip on the take-up spool that comes with 70 millimeter spools. You can, it's compatible with the 65 millimeter spool, but because 65 millimeter film is thick and very springy, it has a hard, it can sometimes misload um, and not catch on your take-up spool with just that compression method. So instead, what I recommend is just a little piece of blue painter's tape that doesn't leave any residue, and it creates a far more secure take-up. Okay, so what you do is you just take that piece of tape and tape it on the spool, and there you go. Otherwise, you then load it into a cassette in exactly the same way. Pop it closed, advance it so that you have tension. But one other small step here is it's good to check that your film is centered as best as you can on these rollers, because the film is a little bit narrower. It can get slightly out of alignment, and just to make things as smooth as possible, it's good to kind of just adjust very slightly. Okay? We load back in, and set our frame counter to the red arrow, etc. Everything else works exactly the same way. There's our first frame. Put it on the camera, and that's what we'll expose. Of course, the huge advantage of 65 millimeter film over 70 millimeter film is that it's brand new and fresh, currently made, and it's the most advanced, because it's for the motion picture industry, it's the most advanced emulsion that Kodak has ever made. So this back can load it and shoot it. You can, one other small difference is you can in 70 millimeter and 65 millimeter cases, you can load as much as you want onto the roll. It's a variable load system. So if you want to load only enough film for let's say a 220 length of film, which allows you to easily develop it in our Patterson or Jobo reels, you can just load that much. You could load a 120 length if you wanted to, or shorter yet. But the maximum you can load is on a 70 millimeter cassette, you can load up to 15 feet, which is about 35 exposures on this, of these huge panoramic exposures on this back. 65 millimeter film, you can only load up to about 13 feet, because the film is thicker. I don't recommend loading more than 13 feet. And you choose how much you determine how much you load by using the Mercury bulk loader. The number of turns determines how much film goes on there. Anyway, it's slightly smaller. 65 millimeter film, 13 feet is the max instead of 15 feet is the max. And that will yield about 32 frames, panoramic frames, on 65 millimeter film. So those are pretty much the only differences between 65 and 70 millimeter in this back. Both work great. For color film, you're best off with 65 millimeter. For black and white film, you're best off with 70 millimeter. That's it. Now, you might want to load a large roll and only and then do that mid-roll cutting that I mentioned when you've reached a 220 length. So you might, if you want to shoot only a 220 length, you don't have to just only load 220. You could load more and then just cut it when you've reached the 220. And to do that, if you do not add leader to your roll, you can get 9 frames at 220 length. So you would just shoot until you have reached your, you've exposed 9 frames, advance 1 extra frame, do your mid-roll cut, and you basically have a 220 length of film, whether that's 65 or 70 millimeter. If you added leader, when you add leader to your film, you add about 9 inches of leader. And when you add 9 inches of leader, you'll be able to take that off when you develop. So you actually will get more shots on your 220 roll. If you added leader to your film, you go 11 frames. So instead of 9, you can shoot 11 frames, and then in the dark when you load your roll, you can remove that leader, which is taped on there, and you'll have 11 frames in your 220 length roll. If you did not add leader, then you should stop shooting after 9 frames, and that's how much you'll get in a 220 roll. So it's very easy actually to, in one of 2 methods, to end at a 220 length of film, which is the maximum you can develop on small in existing systems. But we do have the 13-foot long roll tank, daylight developing tank that we sell with both 70 millimeter and 65 millimeter reels, spirals that fit in it. And that, it's harder to load because it's so long, but that will get you up to 13 feet that you can develop at a time. So you have a number of options in terms of long roll shooting. All of this is much more convenient than shooting 120 in a 6x12 back where you only get 6 frames. You will only ever get 6 frames on your roll, and you have all the hassles of backing paper, etc. And you have to finish the roll before you can develop. This is such a more versatile system. Much cheaper for the film and per frame, and much, much more versatile in terms of how much film you choose to load, when you choose to cut, when you choose to develop, etc. And of course, you can just shoot and shoot and shoot if you want without running out of film. So this is by far the best medium format, best way to shoot medium format film on a large format camera or on the Mercury Stereo 12. Of course, this is the only back that has ever been created that can shoot panoramic 6x12 frames in 65 millimeter or 70 millimeter film on a large format camera. Finally, I'm going to show you one last trick, and that is shooting 120 film in the Mercury Superback. This is not really recommended. The primary purpose of this back, and of course its great advantage, is that you can shoot 65 millimeter and 70 millimeter film in here. I would never ordinarily shoot 120, but we've developed a method to shoot 120 because there might be times when you have a backup roll of 120 that you want to be able to use in the back, or you're traveling, and if you run out of film, you need to purchase 120 film locally, or you 90% of the time want to shoot 65 millimeter and or 70 millimeter film, but there's some type of 120 film that you want to test out in panoramic form, etc., then it is legitimate to shoot 120 film in the back. But it is definitely, I mean, it's, instead of spending many hundreds of dollars on a dedicated 120 back, this might be an option for you for any of those reasons. So for that reason, we have developed a little kit, very inexpensive, that enables makes it possible to shoot 120 film in the Mercury Superback. But it definitely has some drawbacks and hassles to be able to do this. First of all, most importantly, what you need to do is you actually have to enlarge the hole in the top and bottom of the 120 roll. That's the biggest hassle. Our kit comes with a drill bit that allows you to do that. Now, you can do it with an actual power drill by holding the spool tight or clamping it in some fashion and drilling it out. It only takes a second. It's just a tiny, tiny bit of drilling necessary. The other way to do this is if you don't want to take the chance on a drill, or you want a simpler method, or you're in the field without a drill, you can use what also comes in the kit is this. And you just insert the drill bit in this, and then you can do this by hand. You just go in there and drill it out. Okay? So you have to do this for the roll you're going to shoot, as well as a take-up spool. So obviously, once you've done one, you'll have a take-up spool, but the take-up spool also needs to be drilled out. Now, here, one thing I'll say right from the beginning is that a Kodak 120 spool that has the little cross section on the top is definitely easier, much easier to do that little drilling out than a Fuji or Ilford spool, which has just a little circle and slot. It's still possible, it still works, but it's a little more effort on the non-Kodak spools. Something to be aware of. Okay, what you do next is you use these little spacers. 4 of these come in the kit. You use these spacers on the tops like this, and on the bottom, and what you can do, I'll put the take-up one in right away, and we'll load this as we would any 120 spool. Close this up and align the spools like that. They will fit, you'll notice, pretty tightly in the back, and you spool over the backing paper as you normally would with 120, and you can attach it the usual way on your take-up spool. In this case, what you need to do is actually advance the film. I did not get that tight, but you need to advance the film until your start arrow, the start arrow on your backing paper, is aligned with the bottom center hole of these holes that are in the at the base. I don't know how well you can see that in the video, but basically there's a hole in there, and you'll see the black start arrow or start line, depending on the brand, when when it comes in and blocks that, you can no longer see the paper and the little line is blocking your center hole here, then you're aligned properly. But there's something else you need to do, and that is this. 120 film in this back is highly sensitive to being centered. If it isn't properly centered, it gets too high or too low, rides high or low. What can happen is inside the back, it can come loose from being clamped in place, being pressed from the pressure plate against the film gate, and one side can come up and just kind of pop up, and that messes with your flatness. Doesn't wreck the film, but it can alter the flatness of the film. That's more of a danger, much more of a danger with 120 than it is with the other formats, and that's just because 120 is narrower film, and it doesn't overlap the film gate as much. For that reason, when you load, like I said with 65 millimeter film, but more importantly with 120, you need to actually make sure, as best as you can, that you are centered, that the film is nicely centered on those rollers and very evenly centered in where it goes. Okay, once you then advance this to the point where your start arrow is on that center hole, at that point you're ready to put this insert back into the back, and now you need to advance, and you do this now. Unlike the other formats, you do this before you mess with the counter. So don't reset the counter yet. You now need to advance approximately 3.5 strokes. Now, as you know, your stroke can start anywhere. Right now I'm at about a half, so that's actually kind of perfect. I would do 1/2, 1, 2, 3. That's 3.5. If for some reason I had not had a full half, I might have to go an entire other up to half stroke. Right? So you should do this in halves. You should always end on a half stroke or a full stroke. If that means you have to go a little bit slightly more than 3.5 strokes, that's what you need to do. So 3.5 strokes, basically rounded up to the nearest half stroke. So it'll always be slightly different based on how much, where you were in the advance cycle when tensioning and loading the spool. But that's basically it. Once you have 3.5 strokes, you are actually on, not the start, but on frame 1. So because you're on frame 1, you need to advance your frame counter past the red start area all the way to frame 1. And you're now ready to expose your first frame. And when you're shooting 120 in this back, you should get your full 6 frames on the film, and you're on frame 1 now, ready to expose. After you've done 6 frames, you just need to spool. You just keep advancing the extra tail, your extra backing paper, on until you feel no more. You've lost the tension. You know that it's fully rolled up. Again, when you're shooting 120, you don't use the 70 millimeter cassettes like you do with the 65 and 70 film. You do this in the standard way, and you'll end up with backing paper rolled around your take-up spool of 120, and you can simply remove it, seal it, and like you would any other roll of 120. That's it. Again, I could not recommend this back more for pretty much, I think it's the ultimate panoramic back for large format cameras, and of course for the Stereo 12 camera. It allows you to shoot so much more film and so much more versatility than if you were shooting with just 120 on the camera.